This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love arts. My guest today is painter Brad Teare, a Utah-based artist whose richly textured landscapes invite us to experience not just the places he paints, but the very process of seeing and creating. In our conversation, Brad shares how his years as an illustrator, a woodcut artist, and painter helped him to discover his own artistic voice. We explore the emotional power of texture, the lasting influence of seeing Van Gogh's paintings in person, why artists should resist imitating their heroes, and how authenticity, not perfection, creates art that deeply connects with collectors. Here's my conversation with Brad Teare. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. So you've been traveling, so where were you?
I was down in Mount Carmel at the Maynard Dixon studio.
What was that like?
You know, it was really cool. I'd been there 21 years ago. I can hardly believe that. But and I stayed in the bunkhouse. And this time they hosted me in Maynard Dixon's house, in his cabin. And it was great. I don't know. It was kind of magical in a way.
Is it still furnished the way it was?
Yeah, absolutely. Now his hats are up on the wall, and you know, it was just all his books are up on the bookshelves, and yeah.
Did you look at any of them or wear the hat?
I was saying, hey, I could take that hat out on side and wear that and take some pictures. His head's a lot smaller than my head, so I'm a little embarrassed to say I did try to wear one of his hats, but
I'm proud of you. I would have done it too.
He had some cool hats, I gotta say. So
he did. He was an amazing artist.
Yeah, it really was. You know, I'm tempted to say he was underrated, but at this point, people do appreciate his work. But they have reproductions in the cabin, and in the bathroom they had one of his drawings. And I mean, the guy was an amazing draftsman. I mean, he just had so much energy in his drawings, which I'm always in awe of. I really find that incredible.
Did you find that being there in his cabin during this residency that had a profound effect on how you might view your art making going forward?
You know, I haven't really processed the experience as yet, except to know that there was something sort of transformative about it. I'm not sure. At one point, I went down, there was just south of his studio, there's a natural occurring tunnel. The water is eaten through. It looks like really soft rock, could even be chalk. But it's a massive tunnel, and I walked through that thing, and it had some kind of metaphorical power over me. It was quite interesting, but still processing, you know.
Did you do outdoor painting while you were there?
Yeah, that was the primary reason I went down. I brought all my plein air gear, and, you know, I spent most of the day painting every day.
Oh, that must have been fun.
Yeah, it really was fun. I did, like I said, I got dehydrated towards the end. For some reason, I didn't know what was going on, and I thought, that's the weirdest thing. I mean, everybody in Utah knows you need to drink a lot when you're out hiking or whatever. But I was just slowly getting more and more dehydrated towards the end. And we're not like going, what's going on, you know? So I was like hauling like 50 pounds worth of painting gear up and down the foothills around his studio, and really took the stuffing out of me.
With some folks that I know that are really good outdoor painters, they've told me that they are slowing down. You know, they go do outdoor painting with purpose. It's not to create a finished work, but it's and it's a bit of therapy too, to go out into the field and see things.
Yeah, no. My plein air painting was very different from the last time I went out. And I have to admit, this summer I haven't been doing a lot of outdoor painting, but probably about 2 or 3 months ago, I wrote an article, and it was really an exploration. I was trying to find my reason for outdoor painting, because I was thumbing through all my plein air sketches, and I was just thinking, I could be so much better at plein air painting. What am I trying to do? Why do I even do it? And I wrote this article, and it's actually going to be published in Plein Air magazine this September. And it kind of reset my reason for painting outside. And I really I love to have a good painting. Who doesn't? But I just set aside all those considerations of trying to paint an amazing painting and just really focus on trying to absorb the spirit of the landscape. And it was really helpful. And I actually got some pretty nice sketches. In fact, Susan Bingham, the director of the Thunderbird Foundation, she said she wanted a couple of them, so I'll probably frame them up.
Well, that's nice. I would be hard pressed to let go of my outdoor paintings because they're my study notes, my journal, as it were.
That's true. There's some truth to that. I had a superstition. We artists maybe are similar, but I had a superstition that if I gave away a painting or let a painting go, sold it, that somehow it would magnify. There was some kind of return back to me. It's just totally nonsensical, but like a picture, wearing a pair of Lucky socks or something. It kind of worked. So the name of the article that's coming out is called "It's Not the Mountain," and the title means that I'm not a camera. I don't take pictures of mountains. I'm after something else.
What is that?
I'm really fascinated with the marbling color idea, and it's a basic idea of Impressionism. Getting that vibrational oppositional color thing going, that's really important in my project, and I can't fully understand exactly why that is so fascinating to me, except the fact that, it makes really amazing color, right? And there's a kind of magic there. And by magic, it's an optical effect that doesn't exist in reality. And so, it is kind of a magical effect. It's super mundane. It's above the mundane, like the sky's blue, I paint it in blue. No, I look at the sky, I try to suss out what vibrational colors might be there. Might be some aqua there, might be some pink, and you try to put that into the strokes. So that's a big part of my project. So I'm looking into the shadows, especially when I'm painting outside, trying to get that vibrational color in the shadow and really getting that energized, really. And so when you get a nice combination, and there's all kinds of formulas, you see stuff online, how to mix a shadow and all this stuff. But when you get that unexpected color that's just right, that's really cool. And of course, that's why you'd want to keep your plein air sketches, is have a record of all those really cool little strokes in the shadows, But then if you give it away, it'll come back to you tenfold, so it's good.
Well, cast your bread upon the waters and it'll return to you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting. You use the term marbling or marbled color, and to me that's similar to broken color or...
It's exactly the same. Yeah. In reading, people talk about broken color, and I just switched over to marbling color, marbled color. I just like the metaphor just a little bit better. It's a more powerful visual idea for me, marbling versus broken, and it's just semantics, really.
Well, it's okay. Words are important.
They are
in describing what we do, and so. Broken color, I'm thinking of the Impressionists, where they would have individual brush strokes next to each other, different colors, and there's a vibration there. Each one has its own effect.
Yeah, exactly. When I went to see early in my career some of the early Impressionists, French Impressionists, that's one reason I really kind of shifted over to alla prima. Was I love the freshness of the alla prima stroke, and I could see that some of the early French Impressionists had a stroke that was a little bit more brittle. So broken color kind of was very descriptive of what they're doing. There was like these kind of like strokes, that kind of these brittle pieces of straw of color, kind of sprinkled over the top of a dried surface. And I'm not criticizing that technique at all. I mean, they're amazing. And of course, they pioneered, the whole field. So a lot of credit there. But to me, I really like that fresh, juicy stroke of it. Just all the colors just blended together. Marbling just seems to really describe that.
I think the Impressionists really opened the door to actually enjoying a painting. Before that, the paintings were fantastic. I think of Thomas Moran and Albert Beardstadt here in this country, Thomas Cole, the tonalist. They were painting something that had emotional impact, but there were also illustrators of the great American West, as it were. So it had an illustrative side to it. Nothing wrong with that. I like that. But the Impressionists came along and said, you know what? You can enjoy a painting for the painting itself, the textures and the effect of the paints, and you can just paint what you want. And it became more accessible to people.
Yeah. I think, he's considered a post-impressionist, but, Van Gogh, was certainly about enjoying the texture of the paint. Looking at, when you look at a painting that has a lot of rich texture in it, like Van Gogh, there's something about just the texture, the raw, sculptural quality of the surface. And I haven't really, sussed that out totally. Part of it seems to be that you want to touch it. And there's a part of us that's, we do want to see with our hands. Like a child would want to, pick up a watch or something and explore it with their hands. And that's part of, what they consider to be seeing or absorbing the object, So there's something about the texture that's also very engaging, to me, at least. And you're right. I think the Impressionists did kind of, they sparked that joy, of paint. Some of the colors they were able to use were, they're so much joyous than the brown, bitumen and, all those colors the old guys, the academics are using. It was like, oh my gosh, really? You put down a brown and then you paint into the brown, and every color you put in gets brown, It's like, okay, there's not as much joy there.
Right. Well, brown's a cool color, but...
Well, the Impressionists were a lot less concerned about value. They were more concerned about chroma and hue.
Do you remember when you saw your first Van Gogh in person?
Yeah, I do, absolutely.
Do you remember which painting it was, and how did you feel when you saw it?
That's interesting that I don't. You're the first person to ask that, and I don't remember the collection, but it was overwhelming for one thing. It was 120 pieces at the Metropolitan Museum in 1990, somewhere around there, 89, 90. Huge show of his work, and it just blew me away. I literally wept from some of the paintings. It was just incredible. And the thing that really struck me. And I'll talk to my fellow painters, and they go, Van Gogh's not my favorite. He wasn't a good draftsman, and some of his colors are muddy, and, And I'm going, you have to see his paintings in person. Because I literally would stand in front of a painting I had in a book and not recognize it. And it slowly dawned on me, I've seen this in my book, And I've had that experience with Rembrandt's as well, that some artists, they just don't reproduce very well.
That's so true. When I first saw an original, actually several original Van Goghs at the High Museum of Art in Atlanta, it was a staggering moment to see his paintings that they had there, and it was extraordinary.
Yeah. If my work, if you see it in online or whatever, you're only getting about 50%, maybe 70% of the impact at most, because the rest, the 30%, 50% is in the structure of the paint. But I view that as a good thing. And in fact, I spent half of my artistic career as an illustrator, and there's a lot of debate among illustrators, that our work was, fine art or whatever. And, and at the end of the day, I just had to say, your illustration is made to be reproduced in print, and fine art isn't. When I paint a painting, I'm not really thinking, is this going to reproduce well? And I almost find that the better the painting is, the more impact it has on me emotionally, the harder it is to photograph. There's a certain ephemeral quality that's just, you can't capture, and you don't want to capture it. It's like capturing a beautiful bird or something,
I kind of think of like when you post a picture on Instagram of one of your paintings, it's like the movie trailer version. And then if you could go to the gallery or the collector's home and see it in person, now you're seeing the feature film in full, and it's amazing.
No, that's the power of a great, great piece of art.
So you started as an illustrator. Were you working with physical mediums like gouache and that sort of thing, or had the digital? I don't know when you did it.
We moved to New York in '89. And so my career basically spanned from '89 to 2000.
So you were at that great divide, or not divide, but the transition between the physical art, creating physical assets for reproduction, having the big cameras and all that, to digital.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, that was a transitionary phase that I was privileged to experience it, because in a way it was kind of the end of an era. Last of the really great art directors in New York, and that whole tradition of classic illustration. So as an illustrator, I actually did woodcuts. So in fact, that's why I was invited to the Maynard Dixon studio, was because the strength of my woodcuts. And while I was there, I did a series of woodcuts based on imagery from the Maynard Dixon studio. In close vicinity of that area.
And that's the first time you went?
Yeah, way back. Yeah. So that's when I was kind of switching over to more woodcut landscapes. And I did that probably for about 5 to 7 years.
What was the draw for you to do that?
I grew up in Kansas, and pre-internet. And so we didn't have a lot of access to, what it meant to be an artist. Or I had a great-grandfather who was an artist and a painter, landscape painter, and we had some of his paintings in our house. So that was probably what gave me the idea I could be an artist, because I always wanted to be an artist. Never even understood where that came from exactly. It was so embedded in my early childhood. But so the only artist I really had much, there were two artists. There was Birger Senzen.
Oh, man. I love Sanzen's work.
Yeah. He lived about like 30 miles from where I was raised in Kansas, in Lindsborg, Kansas. There was actually a painting in the lobby of my junior high. And so he was an artist. I go, okay, that guy was an artist, and that's cool. I didn't know he was famous. I don't know if he really was that famous at the time. If the painting was in the lobby of the junior high, probably that painting is probably worth $500,000. You know what I mean?
It might be.
And my neighbor had a woodcut of Senzen too, and I didn't really connect the dots. Like, this was this amazing artist, But I loved him. I just naturally loved him, and which is a good sign. It's good that you appreciate someone without realizing how well regarded they are by the art community. That's cool. But there's another book, and it was Rockwell Kent, and I just loved his pen and ink drawings. I just was fascinated with them. So I worked in the summer downtown Manhattan, Kansas. I worked at a print shop. It was kind of a letterpress print shop. I just kind of got obsessed, not obsessed, but intrigued with the whole, printing process. And so when I was in college, our first year of marriage, this print shop was going out of business, and they had an old proof press. I just went down, and I was really struggling. I'd studied illustration at Utah State. I'm here in this little valley I live in. And I just had not connected with the style at all. So I went and I bought this press. I bought some wood engraving blocks, and I started doing wood engraving, of all things, because Rockwell can't do wood engravings. And I mean, I just had a knack for it. So right off the bat, I just immediately was doing these really, pretty confident wood engravings and woodcuts. So my wife and I, we said, hey, we're good to go. Let's pack up the trailer and head to New York. And first day in the city, I got a job with the New York Times.
The first day?
Yeah, first day, yeah.
That's pretty remarkable to me. I mean, when you went, had you already applied, or did you apply that day, or how did they see your work? How did you get hired?
That's really funny because I was kind of reviewing my portfolio with an illustrator that lived out near New York, and I said, I should go to the New York Times and show my stuff. And he goes, well, I don't know, you don't shoot yourself in the foot, on your first day. Just go and see some of these other publishers. I go, okay, whatever. But I was in Times Square, and it was like a blistering hot day. I mean, if you've been in New York on a hot day, it's hot.
You're at sea level, 100% humidity.
Yeah. So I was just sweltering. And I looked down 42nd Street, and there was a New York Times sign. And I go, I bet they've got air conditioning in their lobby. I'm going to go down there. So I went down there, and I walked in. I had a portfolio, of course. I suppose I looked like an artist. And I walked in, and the guy at the desk says, oh, you probably want to see an art director. And I go, sure. So he said, so he's on the phone, and the next thing I know, he's talking to Steve Heller, the kind of legendary art director of the New York Times at the time. Yeah, and I knew who he was. I was like going, holy cow, I'm going to be talking to Steve Heller, And he goes, yeah, go on up to the 9th floor, So I went up and showed my portfolio, and at the end of our conversation, he said, yeah, I got a job for you. So.
Wow. So when they hired you, I mean, was that a full-time job? Are you on salary, or is it?
I was totally freelance. Yeah, I was a freelance. Yeah, and I just worked for book publishers or magazines, whomever.
What a transition from doing woodcuts. I assume you still do the woodcuts.
I maybe do one a year. It's I kind of drifted away from woodcut a little bit. It just wasn't giving back. One thing, I really love color now. So by and large, my woodcuts were black and white back then. I used some color. My landscape woodcuts have a lot of color. I used, I don't know if you know Gustav Baumann. I kind of borrowed his technique of the lost key method of woodcut. And they have a more painterly kind of quality. And so I started kind of having this painterly quality in my woodcuts. And then finally said, well, hey, let's just use paint, and let's just paint. So that was kind of the transition there.
Well, were there lessons that you took from doing the woodcuts to what you do today?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I actually floundered quite a bit, like for 7 years when I was kind of phasing out of woodcut and phasing into painting, where I used brushes. And some of my paintings with brushes, they're pretty good. I mean, I look at them now and that's not a bad painting. I could have probably maybe kept, pursuing that and had a nice career with that. I don't know. But they looked like other people's paintings. I actually had the weirdest opportunity to do an abstract show. It was odd.
An abstract?
Yeah. I had a series of paintings. There were little 8x8s and 10x10s on my mantelpiece. And they were just like paintings of like rock texture or paintings of, the trunk of a tree, that sort of thing. Just super close-ups, I was just trying to decode the rhythm of those textures. A gallery director from one of my galleries came into the studio and she said, "Those would look really cool as abstracts." And I go, "Really?" And she says, "Yeah." I says, "Why don't you do these like 4x4 square, 3x3, and we'll have an abstract show?" And I go, "All right. I mean, that sounds fun." so so when I got into it, I discovered that I really one thing, I couldn't get him to dry in the time frame. She wanted it in 6 months. She wanted to have the show.
About what time period is this?
Probably about 2006, 2007. I thought, well, I'm going to have to use acrylic because they're not going to dry. And so then I started using acrylic, and I thought I can't get enough paint on here with brushes. I'm going to switch over to palette knives and trowels. So I switched over to that, and I just fell in love with palette knives and trowels and that form of mark making. So when the project was over, and the show did really well, amazing. I don't think of myself as an abstract painter, but the show sold really well. I thought I'm gonna paint my landscapes with palette knives, and that's within months of making this switch over to palette knife, I had several galleries approach me, major galleries, and say they wanted to carry my work. It was almost like the palette knife work was more like I'd make a stroke like carving into a block. I mean, and metaphorically, I'm into metaphors, and I'm using knives instead of brushes, same as with woodcut, So there was this kind of like carving out kind of a thing, and it just felt right. It's the way my brain worked. So, it was like I say, it didn't really stick. Like I say, I don't think of myself as an abstract painter, but man, it was so formative to me. I mean, it was 6 months of just painting in abstraction. That was like going to the best school I could have ever asked for.
So what were some of the lessons from that school?
I think it kind of helped me to just let go. I was kind of obsessed with virtuosity as a painter with brushes. Some of my early influences weren't all that good. Sometimes we can have heroes that maybe have a bad effect on us.
Now, that's an interesting thing. I've never heard that before. What do you mean?
Well, one of them, and I mean, I'm in no way, dismissing his work, but one of my early artistic heroes was Maxwell Parrish. And so I tried to emulate his work. He had this just inimitable. I doubt if very many people could do his technique. I mean, I've tried to imitate it. It's almost impossible to get the effects he was getting. So he had some kind of magic. He had the magic touch. He invented that technique. That technique was specifically for him. It was completely wrong for a student to try to co-opt that style, And so I wasted quite a bit of my student years trying to paint like him, doing the glazing and everything. And, I had a few other people who had a kind of a slowing effect on me for my career. And at one point, I was painting these large, very intimate landscapes on watercolor paper that I stretched on these big panels. And I would spatter and do all kinds of scraping, and it was kind of like Andrew Wyeth a little bit, But I was kind of obsessed with that kind of level of detail at the time, and because I just admired his work so much, and it just slowed me down. I mean, my brain is not built like that. I was never going to paint like that. I actually got really good at it, and I could sell these paintings really well, but I could only do like 2 or 3 a year, so it was like, it wasn't going to work, and it drove me crazy, And then I met Alan McGee, and he told me, and I loved Alan McGee's style. I don't know if you know his work.
I'm not familiar with him.
He was a very popular and successful illustrator in the 80s. And I did some sci-fi and stuff like that, but then kind of transitioned into fine art and did kind of a lot of trompe l'oeil and that sort of work later on with gouache and watercolor and very thin washes of acrylic, but highly detailed, extremely highly detailed. And he told me, he says, find a technique that you can live with. And I interpreted that to mean is find a technique that really syncs with who you are. Don't try to be somebody that you're not. It's not going to work, for one thing, and you're just going to frustrate yourself. So part of the abstract project, it kind of shed all of that, presupposition of I'm going to be Maxfield Parrish or I'm going to be Andrew Wyeth or, and say, hey, it's just me and this paint. That's it.
You finally decided to be Brad Teare.
Yeah. We'll see what comes out the other end, I think that's one of the most harmful things artists can do is to, covet other people's styles. I mean, it's really a pointless exercise and just ultimately destructive to both your work and to you personally.
I think that's a good point. And I don't want to dissuade people from going to workshops, for example. It contributes to a lot of artists' income, and I don't want to take away from that. And people do enjoy it. But what I found with myself personally was I was learning how to paint like that person. And I didn't want to paint like that person. I needed the foundations, of course, the values and colors and drawing and that kind of thing, perspective. But in the end, I just needed to be myself. And I was afraid that the more I was exposed to those things, that I would probably become more like them. Does that make sense? Maybe that's a misfounded fear. I don't know.
No, I don't think it is. I think what art students probably should do, and I got to preface it with this, and that is every artist has to invent their own journey, their own path. So if you read all the different art biographies and things about how different artists became who they are, and you go, I'm going to follow that, and in business and other, entrepreneurial fields, there's this kind of idea of, just find somebody who's successful and do what they do, and you'll be successful. That's true, maybe in those fields, but it's not true in art. You've got to invent your own path. You've got to find your own way forward. And I think there's two phases of an art journey. The preliminary phase where you're absorbing all the concepts, and that's absolutely legitimate. And you should do master copies. I mean, you should, and that's how I learned that I wasn't Maxfield Parrish, was trying to do a Maxfield Parrish. And you learn a lot. You learn a lot from and I do glaze now.
See, so you did take a practical lesson from that, right?
Yeah. I took a little pinch of what his magic was, and I was trying to think, did I take anything from Andrew Wyeth? Nothing, pops out, but his control of values is really cool. I hope I'm kind of getting a little bit of a handle on values, but
well, now you mentioned the splattering and the texture and the details that Wyeth used. I've seen his work I'm up close in person, and there is a, shall I dare say it, texture to his approach.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's just if you start looking in at the square inches of what he's done, there's a lot of texture there. There's a lot of abstraction going on, even though his illustrations as a whole are very detailed.
Yeah. When I went to see the Maxfield Parrish show at the Rockwell Museum, I was talking to my friend, and I was staring at really close, probably freaking out the guards, but
I've done that.
We all get yelled at. I almost got arrested at the Whitney. I said to him, Maxfield Parrish was a microscopic impressionist, and I just kind of blurted out. But after I thought about it, I go, yeah, that's a pretty apt description of his, because he had this pointillistic, on a microscopic, not completely microscopic, but on a very high resolution level, He had all these dots. He would take paper and he would squish it into colors and then put it on the board, to get these weird textures. So I think you're right. I think texture is something that I'm really obsessed with, and both those guys were totally into texture. So you do borrow in a way from them, but you've got to transform it into something that's yours.
So we've been talking about your prior foundations for paint, for the way you paint today, and I want to explore this a little more. One thing you're noted for is this is also an audio podcast, but I am holding up a picture. This is in Western art and architecture. This is an incredible painting. I want to see that in person. Where could I see it, Brad?
That one is going to Scottsdale, Legacy Scottsdale, down in Scottsdale, Arizona.
That's amazing. It's a beautiful painting, and I bet it's 10 times better in person if I could just see it.
Yeah, it's got there's a lot of firepower in that baby.
Oh man, you know what draws my eye to it? So I'm looking at this, a spot of sunlight in the crevice of the rocks, and there's the Colorado River, 300 feet of river, 300-foot wide river, and there's that narrow band, and you capture it. I just think that is awesome.
Thanks. That's the kind of apex of my painting ability. That painting, that was a joy to paint. That was just, that thing is 4 feet by 8 feet too, by the way.
I've never done one that big.
I neither. That's the first.
What was it like?
It was a joy. One of my early influences was Wilson Hurley.
Oh, I love Wilson Hurley's work.
Yeah. He has a mural at the Idlesburg Museum, and I go to the Quest for the West every year. So I got to see that thing in person. It just blew me away. It's just incredible,
And he's not known for heavy texture, but it is amazing to see his work, and the scale is unbelievable.
Yeah, it just really brought home. It kind of reignited. I hadn't really seen a lot of his work lately. Of course, he passed away a decade ago or so. It was really great to see his work, live on, and just such magnificent work. But he said the painting big really energized him. So when he stretched a big canvas, he just felt the energy come into the studio. And I got to say, I felt the same thing. I've done 3 large paintings now, and I've loved all 3 of them. And I'm going, well, I hope these babies can sell, or my studio is going to be filling up here pretty quick.
I think of Monet doing what he called them, the grand decorations, the panorama of the water lilies.
Yeah,
I've never seen it, but I would love to see that.
I know, I want to go,
because you would be totally immersed, right?
Yeah.
Is that on board or canvas? I imagine that size would probably be on canvas.
Yeah, when you get that big, they just get too heavy on a board, and I do prefer canvas.
Why is that?
I probably once a year, a couple times a year, I'll do painting on a board, a panel, and usually use like cold wax when I do that. There's something about cold wax that kind of like refreshes my thinking, or clears my visual palette or something. And so it just is a really tactile experience for me. I really enjoy using the cold wax and everything on the panel. And you have to use a panel of cold wax or it'll crack. I get a different mark with the panel. So the stretch canvas gives me the ability to get a smoother transition, a smoother edge, a softer edge or a harder edge. So I have more control that way. I tend to just get hard edges when I'm on a panel a little bit. On a canvas, there's this kind of really gentle give, and I find it just lovely. And I'm very much into the tactile quality of putting on paint too. I'm really sensitive to, the consistency of the paint.
What draws you to want to paint with texture? What is the appeal to you in doing that?
I think it's twofold. One is just the kind of the visceral impact of it. Like when I went to the Van Gogh exhibit and saw that texture they put in. I mean, sometimes he would squeeze the paint right out of the tube, and you could see it on the canvas. It's just like a line of paint, you know. I mean, there's something just really, you know, really visceral, something really kind of savage, sort of primal about it. Like a complete, not a rejection of virtuosity, but a disregard for virtuosity. And that sounds kind of, you know, presumptuous, but I think when we get obsessed with virtuosity, something goes out the window. I'm not sure what it is.
So when you say virtuosity, I mean, what do you mean? You're talking about the movement or the performance?
No, the performance and movement's cool. That's a kind of the rhythm of the act of painting. But I think it's an obsession with, and it's more than technique. It's like you're trying to convert the process into an Olympic performance. Like you're you know, people can jump at 20 feet. You know, I'm going to jump 21 feet. The last painter did 22 feet. I'm going to do 23 feet. This kind of a concern with just this kind of, it's not competition per se, but there's an element of that, and you have to unfetter yourself from that, or you're gonna drown. At least you know, speaking for myself, you know, I enjoy, you know, a really virtuoso painting. You know, I mean, they can trigger certain moments of joy in me as well. But you know, for me personally, it's like a quagmire of some kind. You know, as you can tell, I'm struggling here to articulate exactly what I mean.
It sounds like, let me see if I can zero in. I don't know that I can.
No, let's try.
So as I'm sitting here listening to you and you're talking about virtuosity, and I think about, okay, what's a parallel? A musician that's really, really good. You might call him a virtuoso. And why is that? It's not just a performance, but it's all the things that he has learned, the way he expresses himself, the way he bends the string on the guitar, or you know, the vibrato on the violin. Those are specifically his techniques, his ability to express in his own voice. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I think you've latched onto a really good metaphor there. You know, music, I would say virtuosity, as I'm kind of loosely defining it here, would be analogous to an overproduced album. You know, like when you have a performance that has all the little imperfections of a live, you know, performance, and there's this energy there.
So Beyonce versus Arlo Guthrie.
Yeah. It, you know, there's something kind of primitive about those kind of live performances where they just kind of let things go. You know, I didn't really understand, you know, musicians sort of like, I'm thinking, well, Arlo Guthrie is pretty good, but like Neil Young or Bob Dylan, you know, those sort of musicians, I didn't really understand them until I got to a certain point. I started to understand jazz a little bit better, like Miles Davis, a little bit what he was trying to, you know. I started to see, yeah, they're trying to bring in the vitality. They're trying to bring in that life. And sometimes you get somebody like a producer like Eddie Offord or somebody like that. They can kind of produce the life out of a performance. And that's what I'm kind of labeling right now, virtuosity, or there's this kind of obsession with the perfectionism. And I'm trying to introduce or allow kind of more, you know, wabi-sabi kind of a idea back into my work. And that is the idea of it being perfectly imperfect.
Perfectly imperfect.
Yeah.
That's an interesting concept.
I actually got this from woodcut, because let's say I'm cutting a woodcut, and you know, let's say I have the sky. You know, in the sky, there's just like a couple of clouds or something. If I clear out all of the wood out of that, so it just prints, you know, blank, you know, white. Well, how energetic is that? How interesting is that? It's not. So you leave all these little imperfections in the corners of the woodcut and around the objects. So it has this kind of like these little linear, my wife and I, we used to call them titch marks, and I don't know what the real word is, but there's just kind of electric little marks around a woodcut. And well, you go, well, that's kind of sloppy, Is that a really good craftsman that would leave all those little marks and little chunks there, And you go, well, if I clear it out, all the life's gone, all the energy's gone. So that's the kind of idea that I tried to, kind of infuse back into my painting, was that kind of imperfection. And people, when you look at my paintings up close, you go, man, there's a lot of sloppy painting here. I can clearly see he mixed up 3 colors on the palette, took one swipe, was probably not even looking at the canvas, and he just left it.
But that's not what you did. There's more to it than that, right?
I was actually filming myself once, and I actually did see myself put on a stroke when I didn't even look. I was, totally by feel, or I knew where that stroke was going, and I was, mixing the next color in my mind,
Well, see, a guitarist that plays a beautiful solo, his eyes are closed sometimes, right?
Yeah. I know where the canvas is. I knew what the colors were on my palette, So.
Well, bottom line, it was fun to do.
Right. You kind of let go.
Sometimes we think of perfection as precision. It's like if you had a perfect motor in a car, it would never break down, right? But there's another aspect of perfection. There's another definition that I don't hear people talk about a lot. It's perfection basically means that it meets a purpose. Art needs a bit of randomness. It needs that personal touch. Otherwise, it would be a photograph, or it would be just this impersonal rendering that doesn't touch the heart. So it's perfect, and your paintings are perfect in the sense that they satisfy that need for the randomness, the emotion, the energy, the vibrancy that comes through. It satisfies a viewer's need for that.
Right. I mean, you could almost say that an artist gets to create the formula by which he or she makes their art.
I love that.
And you get to follow that formula to your heart's content without regard to the work of other artists. That allows for all kinds of art. I mean, some people's personalities are very, punctilious, they're very into detail, that sort of thing. And their art's going to be totally, totally different than someone like, I don't know. I really do believe in just a wide spectrum of different kinds of art, and I do enjoy a lot of different kinds of art,
Me too.
The trap or the flaw would be when an artist, when you kind of like go, wow, you go to a show and you go, oh, I love this guy's work so much, I wish I could paint like him, and it's just totally, contrary to your personality. Do you know what I mean? And that's just so wrong,
Well, we've been talking about texture from the standpoint of an artist, mostly. You made an interesting comment in one of your newsletters. I wrote it down. You said that texture is one of the strangest tools an artist has because it works on the viewer even when they can't explain why. That is fascinating to me. Let's talk about the effect on the collector, the viewer of your painting. What effect does texture have on them? Why is it so compelling?
Well, one thing is that it's a record. When you see the texture, I mean, it's a stroke by, you can say there's a stroke that the artist made that stroke. You mix that color, put it on. So it's a record of how we built it. Like if there were no texture, there were no brush strokes visible, you wouldn't go, well, did he do the sky first, then put it, But I mean, you can actually see this kind of layering of this kind of interweaving of colors, and you could almost track down exactly how, what order I put down the paint because they overlap and finally build up to the ultimate impasto.
You see the archaeology of it.
Yeah. So there's this sense that you're actually witnessing a record of an event. That certainly is one aspect, I believe. When I wrote that newsletter, I was really kind of burrowing down and really kind of go, what is it about texture, and really trying to uncover what that was. Maybe ultimately, largely, it's kind of a mystery. I think there is that kind of tactile thing, like you want to touch it. People say they want to touch it. I actually had one woman say she wanted to lick the paint.
Okay, I draw the line right there. You can't lick the painting.
No, that's not allowed at Whitney. You're going to end up in cuffs, but people have, they say this, they use terms, sometimes musical terms and sometimes culinary terms, like they say the paint, it looks delicious. So you're kind of tapping into a full spectrum of emotional, like touch, taste, the mouthfeel or whatever it is,
Right.
and so there's this kind of spectrum, and if you can, evoke as many emotional notes as possible, you get a richer experience. Yeah, there's another quality to textured paint, and I was talking with a fellow artist. It was around 2000, and both of us were kind of making the shift out of illustration at the time, and we were sort of prognosticating on what the future might hold. And it's turn of the century, and people love to make predictions. We were kind of falling into that, and we decided that art that didn't have a handmade quality was gonna fall to the wayside. So if you had an art form that was totally pristine, and you go, was this done on a computer, or was this done by a human being, or those art forms were going to be less valued. So there was going to be an emphasis on the handmade, the tactile, this kind of wabi-sabi aesthetic. And I think largely that's proven true. I mean, not to the degree we anticipated perhaps, but I think there's something about when you walk into a gallery, and like I frame my paintings so that they're in floater frames, so you can see around and you can see the edge of the canvas, you can see the thick paint, hanging off the edge. And I want people to know that it is an object. I don't want them to think it's just some abstract, form or something. I want them to know that it was an object that was created by a human being. And I think there is an element of that. And obviously, things that are printed, things that are, reproduced in different methods, they're obviously made by a human being. I mean, a robot didn't, run the printing press or whatever, but it's somewhat removed. And the less removed you can be, the more impact that arts can have. So, like when I talk to young artists, I go, yeah, do an art form that's you can see the mark, the fingerprint of the artist. We want to see that.
Isn't that amazing when you do see that on a painting? Is fascinating. Finding a piece of brush hair that accidentally left the ferrule of a brush, and it's embedded in the painting, and the artist missed it, but it's there, and you see it. Oh, wow. I love that.
I just discovered, I was wrapping up a painting of a ship, and I discovered a chunk of canvas that was about as big as my thumbnail that had not been covered, and you could see some of the drawing underneath. In that case, I'd used a graphite pencil to kind of sketch the outlines. And my first instinct was, I need to cover that. I need to, I do leave little chunks of red showing through, but I normally don't like to show that much and have a little bit of the drawing showing through. It seems kind of sloppy. It's like poor craftsmanship or something. Then I thought, no. And it was one of the bigger paintings. I go, no, leave that. That's the mark. That's my mark,
That is the true certificate of authenticity.
Yeah, yeah.
What kind of feedback have you gotten from your collectors that really put a pep in your step, as it were? The feedback that they've given you about why they bought the piece, or how the piece makes them feel, or how they live with it?
Previously in my early career, I didn't really enjoy going to shows that much, because I didn't know what to say to collectors and that sort of thing. And they're obviously reacting positively because that's why they're there. They want to see your work. But But when you're asking that question, I share this with a little bit of reservation, but also with a little bit of awe and deep, profound appreciation. I've had the experience of people coming to my shows, and they'll be 10, 15 feet back, and they'll just be crying. They'll be looking at my work, and they're just crying. And generally speaking, I give them a little bit of time, I don't want to intrude or whatever, but I generally will go and ask them, what are you feeling, And the things they say are just so beautiful that it really outstrips anything that I ever anticipated as an artist that people would say about my work.
Was there any one thing that you remember that you're willing to share that illustrates that?
I could tell the woman was struggling to articulate, when I asked her the question, but she said that this is what heaven looks like.
Wow.
That almost, it just kind of almost broke me up, And, I can't say that particular show that I was thinking about heaven when I painted those paintings, but it was a very beautiful expression to me. But I've had that quite a few times, and people will weep in front of my paintings, and very, very profoundly touching.
That's amazing. That is amazing. It leaves me speechless. Well, I appreciate you sharing that very emotional response. It's just a beautiful thing to see that art can move people in a profound way.
Absolutely.
So you just got back from your Maynard Dixon residency, and appreciate you sharing the experience of that. What's coming up next for you that you're excited about?
I always have the Quest for the West show in September. And that's always a super big deal for me. I take that very seriously, and I love it. And they treat us really good out there. And I've had a sold out show every year I've been there. So always super successful for me, and energizing.
That's exciting.
Yeah. Last year, the director of the Booth Museum bought one of my paintings for their permanent exhibit. And I'd like to get out there. And I since they bought a painting, I thought, hey, this has got to be a precursor to an invitation to their fundraiser, right? So I'm waiting by the mailbox for that. But other stuff I've got going, I've got a few kind of pop-up shows, and I don't have any solo shows coming up or anything at the moment, but just getting out, going to the parks, painting.
Avoiding the forest fires?
Yeah, that's unfortunate. Last year we had a really good year, no forest fires. I was hoping for the same this year, but I'm kind of looking forward to doing some larger paintings. That one, the Grand Canyon one that you showed. I mean, I go, if I could, I agree with you that you have that hierarchy of viewing, and you go on this visual journey. I really love that about a painting, and it's got to be subtle. You don't want it to be heavy-handed. But I would like to go to the national parks and do that sort of hierarchical painting with every park, and certainly in Utah and in the West. We'll see. Because that was really a unique moment for me. I went to the park and I was painting there, and a park ranger came up with a bunch of kids and parents, and he was explaining, I was at Moran Point, and he was explaining how Thomas Moran did this fusion of imagery, from different parts. And they actually have a reproduction of one of his paintings there. And he was saying, this peak here was over there, and he kind of just fused them all together. I don't know, it was kind of an eye-opening moment for me, to hear him explain while I was painting, and the sun was going down. It was just like a beautiful moment, where I was absorbing this wisdom of Thomas Moran, It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really neat to stand at the different points where you imagine that he painted in Yellowstone and some of the other national parks. That's what I like about living here is I used to want to do the iconic,
Right.
And now I want to do something that's okay, you might recognize it, but you might not.
Yeah.
It's what I would discover the way I explore the Southwest now is I get in a car and I just drive and I see something. Yeah. Oh, here's a little canyon here. Let me go explore the canyon.
Yeah, yeah. No, I shift back and forth because I did just recently want to do a little farm scene it's just over the border in Idaho from where I live. It's just a gorgeous little farm scene, and nobody know where it is, But I go, I don't want to move away from that. I don't want to do totally Moran Point kind of stuff, but occasionally I want to do a couple a year at least.
Of course. And I wasn't saying the way I worded it, it made it sound like that was the wrong thing to do. And then that's not what I meant. I think those are gorgeous paintings, and I love them.
Well, my roots really are in that kind of, the little valley where I live is very rural, or used to be. It's kind of getting overdeveloped, but those are my roots. Is kind of those ranch scenes, and I did a little plein air over near Crested Butte. I was just too long, and I saw this little scrawny little tree reflected in this kind of a ditch, along the road, and it was just gorgeous. And, I was painting all these, Crested Butte and all these mountains and everything, which are gorgeous. And then I knocked out this little kind of intimate little scene. And I go, I don't want to lose that. I want to keep one foot in that, in that door, because they're just so poetic, and, it's so evocative of the West. You could just feel the West in that little tree,
Those are the kind of things that appeal to me.
And it's sort of like some of the most beautiful poetry are poems that they say very little. I mean, there's very few words, but assembled in the right way, just have this incredible punch, emotional impact.
Brad, so much more we could talk about. Thank you for being on The Artful Painter today.
It's been my pleasure. Really enjoyed it. It's a good conversation.
I thoroughly enjoyed talking to Brad Teare. What a fascinating artist he is. I think there was a lot more to him that I had time to explore, but there were a few good points there. I knew this was a conversation I was going to enjoy when he said things like, it's not the mountain. He's after something else. He's a deep thinker. And I think that's what's needed to be a really great artist. You go beyond the act of rendering an image. You create something that connects with the person that's going to be looking at your painting. Hopefully it connects with you as the artist, and that carries over into the viewer's experience. So anyway, that's the kind of thing I'm looking for. And I think that's one of the reasons why this podcast that I do is different. And I admit, not everyone enjoys this. I read a review a while back. Somebody said, this used to be one of their favorite podcasts, but they've latched onto another podcast because in that one they share the painting technique of that artist. And that's okay. If that's what you want, go watch that podcast, all right? This podcast has become more than that. It's different. I don't know how to describe it. I like exploring the why. I like exploring what's going through the artist's mind when he creates something. It doesn't always have to be profound. It can just be for the sheer joy of it. But I love hearing what they're thinking about. I like hearing their why. So that's why that expression, it's not the mountain, it's something else I'm looking for. That touches my heart. That's what I'm interested in. So I think what's happening is this podcast, it isn't just becoming an interview show. I want it to be more than that. I want it to be kind of like an archive of how artists think, their philosophy on how they approach their art. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't explore. I want to really get into the why and the how. What are they thinking? Not just, what kind of palette knives do you use? What kind of brushes do you use? What's on your color palette? I mean, I like those things, and they do show up in my show, but usually naturally from time to time. And I think the other thing that makes this show different, I think I will die. I think I will die if I ever hear another, well, I had a crayon in my hand when I was 2 years old and I've been drawing ever since. That bothers me. That's why my show rarely ever starts with a historical biography of the artist. I am interested in the historical biography of an artist because I think early experiences shape who the artist is today, but I want to start with today. Where are they today? What journey are they on today? And if you start there, the natural thing that will happen is that biography will come in bits and pieces. But having this formulaic, give me the history of your history, starting with, I had a crayon in my hand when I was 2 years old. I'm sorry, that's boring. I don't want to hear that. And that's why I don't do it in this show. I generally don't do it. There may be exceptions. I'm a complicated man, and I reserve the right to change my mind at any given moment. But that's my prerogative. But I think because of the approach that I take with the show, I know sometimes people are wanting it to come fast. I think about Mark Sublett and his podcast. I love his show. The man has incredible knowledge and experience. He has help to edit and produce the shows. I mean, I think he's at 400 episodes. And what is this episode? I think this one is number 79. It will take me years to get to 400 episodes. But this is the pace I want to go. I want to explore deeply the artistic process. And sometimes it goes beyond the art. It can be life experiences, travel, cultures, history, things like that, science. All of those things contribute to a well-rounded, I think, approach to this show. That's why sometimes conversations will veer away from the art, and it may veer toward the travel, the science, the nature, the experiences, those kind of things, because those add up to a wealth of, how shall I say it, a body of experience, I guess, that shapes an artist's vision. Now, I know that sounds very pretentious, and I don't mean it that way. Sometimes we just paint because it's just for the sheer joy of it. That's why I do like some of the expressionist painters, abstract painting. I follow a number of them on Instagram. I love seeing what they do. It's very experimental. And I think that experimentalness, that playfulness, unleashes the joy of painting. I love representational art, don't get me wrong. That is my goal, is to create generally representational art. But the calligraphy of expressionism in painting, that contributes to a person's voice, that experimentation. If you look closely at Scott Christensen's paintings, if you look closely at Clyde Aspivig's paintings, or any other artist out there that I would consider experienced, inspiring, dare I use the word masters? They certainly wouldn't use it in connection with themselves, but I will. These are the true masters. And you look at their work, and it incorporates all of those things. And I think That's what I like exploring. That's what I like experiencing. And maybe that's why I'm all over the place when I paint, because I'm playing most of the time. I'm playing. I'm not thinking about creating paintings to sell. I'm not creating paintings for a gallery. I'm not painting for a Prix de West. Though that would be pretty cool if I could be in Prix de West. Yeah. Nothing wrong with having a goal of being good enough to be invited to an invitational, right? So anyway, that's my thing. I just wanted to just kind of ramble a little bit about why this show's different, why my pace is slow, and what fascinates me. And I get it. You may not like it. That's okay. What is it that every single artist that's been on this show, almost every single artist on this show, they say paint for yourself first, and hopefully you will create something for others, right? And so this show selfishly is for me, but it is something I hope I'm unselfishly sharing with you. And I hope you find value in it. Perhaps not every episode, that's okay. But an episode like this with Brad Teare and so many others I've had in the past, just so inspiring to me. This is why I do this. I just love doing it. So I guess that's all I've got to say about this. I appreciate the ramble. If you've lasted this long in this episode, well, I deeply appreciate you. I rarely ask for anything, but I will go for an ask. Many of you in the past have contributed a voluntary donation to the Artful Painter. So if you find value in this show or any other episode and you want to express your gratitude, have at it. Go to theartfulpainter.com/donate. But if not, that's okay. No pressure. There's enough pressure in this world for tippers, for tips, right? So I don't want to pressure you or guilt you into that. Never, ever. There is no expectation of that. I'm just saying it's there if you want to, and that's okay. And many of you have, and I deeply appreciate it. I'll tell you, there's another thing I really enjoy. I do enjoy getting the emails from you and the comments. You can go to theartfulpainter.com/contact and send an email to me. Or you can respond to the email blast that I send out occasionally, not very often. But if you're subscribed to my email list, well, yeah, you can reply to that email. I have it set up so that if you just do a reply, and I do read every single email that I get. I may not be able to respond to all of them, but I will read them all. So, and I do appreciate getting your notes of encouragement, your questions, your comments, your observations, and sometimes your rebuttals, if they're friendly. So, I'm working on having thicker skin. I am. Anyway, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this edition of The Artful Painter, and I will see you in the next one, whenever that may be.
And we're getting a picture on the TV.